Beautiful Disaster 2012. Book 1, Chapter 7. A Sudden Fight. Doug was confused as ever. Shane and Ben helped him to his feet and dragged him away from Nick and the dark human. Nick stared down the dark figure. It stared back, and then an eerie laugh echoed down the hall as Nick stared in anger at the dark mass. "Come on, Nick. Take your beam sword out. You don't want to make a mess of things in front of your friends," said the dark figure in a booming voice, and Nick pulled out a pole much like the one the dark figure had. "It was foolish of you to show yourself here this evening, Knox," replied Nick. "Why is that?" "I just want to have fun," said Knox, which was the name of the dark figure. "You should leave, 'cause now I have some explaining to do," said Nick angrily. Knox pulled his beam sword out and flicked it on. A flash of reddish black appeared suddenly, which shined on Nick's face. "Your move," said Knox with his beam sword out and ready. Nick stepped forward and his beam sword opened in a flash of simple red, and there was a flash of light much like lightning as Nick's beam sword collided with Knox's. Doug turned to Ben. "What the hell?" said Doug, and Ben nodded. "It's like Star Wars," said Ben rather loudly. Shane turned and saw Tobin, Scott, and Taylor on the staircase. "What happened?" asked Tobin, appearing next to Doug. "Nick is fighting someone. They were using beam swords," said Doug. Taylor pushed through and began hugging Doug suddenly. Meanwhile, Nick flew back onto the floor, water splashing everywhere. Nick then rolled out of the way just in time as Knox's beam sword came down where Nick did lay. Nick got to his feet and turned his beam sword on in time to stop Knox's from taking Nick's head off. There was a loud bang as Nick took a swing and Knox completely dodged it and flipped backwards, landing on his feet. That's when he saw Nick running down the hallway away from Knox. Knox laughed. He turned his beam sword off and ran after Nick. He caught up in only a matter of seconds. He grabbed Nick and pushed him back into a door, smashing his head through the window. Knox held Nick there with a laugh. Nick reached up with his free hand and pulled a glass from his head. The next second he used his free hand and smashed Knox over the head. This caused him to let go of Nick and scream out in pain. Nick ran down the hall, passing the math room. Knox turned and watched Nick run away down the hall. The next moment he turned, expecting to see Knox in front of him. Instead, a chair that was a reddish color hit the wall and a chain that was a reddish color hit the wall. It looked like electricity, and at the end of it was sharp enough to stab the wall next to Nick. "Oh," said Nick. And the next moment that part of the wall blew apart and dust flew everywhere. Knox laughed as Nick coughed. When the dust cleared, Knox saw him running again. "No!" screamed Knox, and he lifted his hand up again, and a red lightning chain shot out of his hand again and down the hall. Nick reached the end of the hallway, and he turned and saw Doug, Tobin, Shane, Taylor, Ben, and Scott standing there. Shane and Ben ran towards him, but froze as a reddish glow lit up Nick's face as he opened his beam sword. The next thing that happened was water splashed everywhere, and as Nick dodged the lightning chain, it hit the wall, and Knox went wide-eyed. Nick swung his beam sword, cutting the lightning chain. There was a crash, and the school shook. Knox could be heard screaming just before an explosion went off. Doug ran by Shane and Ben, which stared in disbelief. Nick laid there on the ground, half submerged in water. "Nick?" said Doug slowly as he appeared at Nick's side. He opened his eyes and sat up fast. Knox was gone. Nick sighed in relief for a second before turning to Doug. "I guess I have some explaining to do," said Nick. "Rest first. Explain later," said Doug loudly, and Nick laid back down in the water. Doug turned from Nick to his friend standing in the hall. Tobin was nodding slowly. Taylor stared at Doug. He looked both amazed and scared. Scott turned around looking worried. His eyes were wide. Shane and Ben stared at Doug, and Nick was there, mouths hanging wide open. "Guys, you want to close your mouths before something flies in it and help me?" asked Doug suddenly, and Ben and Shane snapped and nodded slowly. To be continued in Part 8.